You've probably heard it a million times. Public debt is a ticking time bomb. Governments are out of control, and one day the bill is going to come due. But what if almost everything we've been told about public debt is wrong? What if the real story is something completely different, and it's happening inside your bank account right now? Okay, let's get into it.
First things first, we need to wrap our heads around the numbers here. And trust me, they are absolutely mind-boggling. But understanding the scale is the first step to uncovering the truth.
All right, let's take Italy. You always hear about Italy's debt problems, right? Well, its public debt is sitting at around 150% of its entire economy. A huge, scary number.
But then you look over at Japan, and its debt is more than 250% of its GDP. How is that even possible? How are they still standing? We're going to get to that.
Now let's bring it to the United States. We're talking about a national debt that's blown past $36 trillion. It's a number so big our brains can't really even process it.
And here is the big one. If you add up all the government debt from every country in the world, you get to about $100 trillion. Just let that sink in for a second. $100 trillion.
And that leads to the single most important question you can possibly ask. I mean, think about it. If pretty much every country on Earth is in debt, who did they borrow all this money from? Martians? The answer to that question changes everything.
Because here's the secret. Public debt doesn't work like your personal debt. Not even close. It follows a completely different logic, one where the government's red ink is directly connected to your green.
This is probably the most crucial idea we have to understand. When a government sells a bond, a treasury bill in the US or a BTP in Italy, it isn't just moving existing money around. It is creating a new financial asset out of thin air and injecting it into the economy.
And this chart shows it perfectly. It's a simple accounting fact. The government's deficit is, dollar for dollar, the private sector's surplus. They are perfect mirror images. Every dollar of red ink the government spends beyond its tax income becomes a dollar of green ink in the bank accounts of people and businesses. So think about what that means. If you want to eliminate the government deficit, you are, by definition, eliminating private savings.
So who actually owns this mountain of debt? Well, chances are you do. You just might not realize it. Look at this breakdown for Italy. The vast majority is held by Italian banks, insurance companies, pension funds, and yeah, regular families. That debt isn't a burden to them. It's their asset. It's their savings. It's their wealth.
But, and this is a huge but, here's where things get really ugly. That wealth is not spread out evenly at all. The interest payments on all this global debt overwhelmingly flow to the top 1% because they own most of it. On average, someone in the top 1% makes about $40,000 a year just from interest. Now compare that to what the other 99% of us make from actually working for a living, just $13,500. The system is literally designed to pay people more for owning money than for working for it.
So how on earth do we get a system like this? Well, to understand that, we need to go back in time and talk about one brilliant economist who basically invented the modern world, John Maynard Keynes.
So, Keynes witnessed the total economic collapse of the Great Depression and came up with a radical idea. When the private economy crashes, the government has to step in and spend. His theory was proven on a colossal scale during World War II, and for the next 30 years, it worked like a charm. We had stable growth, recessions were short, it was a golden age. And then, things started to go off the rails.
His idea was actually incredibly simple. Think of it like a car. The government has two pedals. The accelerator is deficit spending. You push it during a recession to get the economy going again. The brake is saving, paying down debt. You use that during a boom to stop the economy from overheating. Accelerator and brake. Simple, right?
Well, this is where a beautiful economic theory ran headfirst into the messy reality of politics. The system wasn't broken by its critics. It was betrayed by the very people who benefited from it.
And here's exactly how it happened. Politicians fell in love with the accelerator. I mean, who doesn't love getting free money, stimulus checks, and tax cuts? But the brake? Hitting the brakes means raising taxes and cutting spending when times are good. That is a guaranteed way to lose an election. So they did the politically easy thing. They threw the brake pedal out the window. And ever since, in good times and in bad, we've had our foot slammed on the accelerator.
Which brings us right back to Italy. It is the perfect real-world example of why all the headlines have the story completely backward. The problem was never how much money they borrowed. The real story is why they had to borrow it.
Now check this out. This is from a Dutch Economic Institute, so a neutral source.
They found that Italy's debt hasn't actually grown much faster than the debt of so-called frugal countries like Germany. So, if the amount of borrowing isn't the issue, what is?
The problem isn't the number on top of the fraction, the debt. It's the number on the bottom, the GDP. Just look at the growth since the 2008 crisis. Germany's economy is up 22%, France of 17%. Italy's has actually shrunk. Italy doesn't have a spending problem, it has a growth problem. And when your economy isn't growing, any amount of debt eventually becomes impossible to manage.
Okay, so we've had decades of politicians with their foot stuck on the accelerator. What does that actually mean for you today and for the money you've worked so hard to save? This is where it all comes home to roost.
We have now walked right into what's called the debt trap. For years, interest rates were near zero, so borrowing was basically free. But now that rates are rising, governments are having to borrow new money just to pay the interest on the old money they borrowed. The U.S. government alone is now spending over $880 billion a year just on interest payments.
So how do governments escape this trap? Well, there's a sneaky, quiet way out. It's called financial repression. Here's how it works. The government makes sure that the interest rate you get on your savings account or on a government bond is always a little bit lower than the real rate of inflation. So, yes, the number in your bank account might go up, but what that money can actually buy, its purchasing power, is going down year after year. And that, right there, is the final piece of the puzzle. Inflation isn't an accident. It's a feature of the system. It is the invisible tax. It's the only way for governments to slowly and silently reduce the real value of a debt that has become way too big to ever pay back, but is far too important to the entire global financial system to ever default on.
So you see, the real enemy was never the $100 trillion number. The real danger is simply not understanding the rules of the game that's being played with your money. The numbers in your savings account are safe, sure. But the real question you need to be asking yourself is this. Every year that goes by, what can they still buy?